Assalamu alaikum, fam. Hope you're doing well. So, I've read a lot about Aristotle. A lot of people have. However, a lot of people don't really go through the time. So, let's go through it and kind of get familiar with the perspectives and then really dig into it and see if he has some points or where we can correct or how we would answer, essentially. So, let's continue. Now, this book has his metaphysics, logic, physics, psychology, ethics, politics, and poetics. So, you are able to kind of buy the different books, that aren't meshed together, but these one are, this book is particularly unique. Okay, book one. All men by nature desire to have knowledge. An indication of this is the delight that we take in the senses, quite apart from the use that we make of them. We take delight in them for their own sake, and more than any other this is true of sense of sight. Now, it is true that I think we do have a desire to knowledge, but at the same time, you wonder about people who really don't want to seek any type of knowledge. They kind of just want to exist, right? Entertainment versus knowledge. I think that'd be something that we would examine, right? But at the same time, he's living in, ancient Greece where Netflix and TikTok aren't there. So it makes sense he thinks like that. But let's see, he might have even more for us to look at. For not only when we want to do something, but even when we have no intention of doing anything at all, we prefer sight to practically every other sense. Now, this is unique. Our eyes do play quite a huge role in entertaining ourselves and delighting ourselves. When I pray, I often thank Allah for my eyes because I get to read, draw, paint, and stare at bugs and birds, right? So, yes, I agree. This reason is that more than any other sense, it enables us to get to know things, and it reveals a number of differences between things. Yes, I agree. I mean, sight really allows differences to come to fruition. Really does, because we like comparing things and analyzing them, contrasting them, synthesizing information, learning from example. Eyes are definitely a gift. I would say that all of our senses are, but sight is really quite amazing, right? Just the human eye in general. It just moves about the world in such a unique way that we interact with it, right? Animals have senses by nature when they are born. From this, memory develops in some of them, but not in others. Now, I wonder how he can justify that, because if it's by nature, right? So, wait, hold on. A goldfish. Goldfish forget pretty quickly, right? There's been some studies that say, like if you tell someone you have the mind of a goldfish, they'll usually be like, hey, it means I forget a lot, So, elephants are said to have very extensive memory. They say, oh, an elephant never forgets, They have very long migration paths. But then again, insects like monarch butterflies have a long migration path back and forth from Mexico to America and such. So you wonder, right, how are they doing it, right? Because they don't have a long lifespan, so Allah has a lot of mystery, but let's see. Consequently, those animals in whom memory does develop are more intelligent and learn more readily than those in whom it does not. So memory really helping intelligence here. Because if you can't memorize something, maybe you're not as intelligent. Because through remembering something, your trials and errors, you can avoid it next time, right? Yeah, that's interesting. Those that, while they have memory, cannot hear sounds, bees for instance, and any other animal that are of this kind, are intelligent but cannot learn. Those that have this sense as well as memory do learn. So it's like instinct versus like being trained or something like that. Acquiring skills like a German Shepherd versus a dung beetle. Maybe that's too different. But dogs, pigs, cows, certain parrots, crows, monkeys, they all have this capacity to kind of learn, especially gorillas. Elephants, even, you can give them a paintbrush. They'll paint and then they'll kind of remember to grab the paintbrush and paint. So there's something there, right? Something there. Other animals then live by impressions and memories and have only a small share of experience. So notice this impressions versus memories here. One could argue an impression is like a memory, but it's not as deep, is it? A memory is retained longer than just an impression. But the human race lives, too, by art and by calculations. Yes, I'd have to agree with that. Through art we do learn, finesse, even certain aspects of our existence do feel like they're very artistic. Calculations, definitely like, okay, how far do I have to go for this? How much weed am I going to get through this amount of land per, square foot? How large do I have to make, the pillars to make this building stand? You're calculating quite a lot, I'd say. Experience is produced in men from memory, since many memories of the same thing produce the effect of a single experience. Experience seems to be almost the same sort of thing as science. Well, experience does help you to form a hypothesis that you can test, right? And art. But in fact, it is through experience that science and art occur among men, since, as Polus says, experience produces art, but inexperience chance. So, that's a good point. If you are experienced, like you're a good sculptor, you've been doing quite a lot, you have, this big grand piece of work that you do, yes. Whereas if you were throwing something on the wheel, you did it by chance, it wasn't based off your memory and repetition and training and practice, but rather a almost burst of chance. It's very interesting, very, very dynamic way of putting it. Art comes into being when, from many notions derived from experience, one universal judgment is formed about things that are alike. If one judges that when Calais was suffering from a particular illness, a particular thing did him good, and the same thing was the case with Socrates, and with many other individuals. This is part of experience. But if one judges that it is good to people, all of them, of a particular kind, who are thus defined as belonging to a single class, and who are suffering from a particular illness, phlegmatic or bilious people, for instance, suffering from a burning fever, this is part of art. Now that's interesting. So judging, and then particular things, if they're good or bad, though it's all related to our experience, yes, how we judge, that's true. We define it on the singular or belonging to a class, of a particular or of a group. Part of art. Let's see how he justifies that. As far as getting things done is concerned, experience does not seem to differ at all from art. In fact, we observe that those who have experience meet with more success than those who have grasped the principles of the subject without having any experience. Now this is unique, right? So, as you gain more and more success, your experience will increase, and doing so, that'll actually help you attain the understanding of the principles of the subject. But if you just did it and you succeeded, but you didn't really grasp the principles behind it, or the subject behind it, you haven't got really much of the memory experience as someone who has. Very interesting. The reason for this is that experience is knowledge of individuals. Reason is experience and knowledge of individuals. Huh. Whereas art is knowledge of universals. Oh, art is knowledge of universals. So I've heard this talked about when it comes to symmetry in sculpture, right? Those who, now you have kind of like postmodern art where people, they can, distort the face to create, a unique piece. But if you're doing like something like the Statue of David, proportion, that shows his skills of like the universal. There was a word for it in the hips. That there was like a axis that it was really hard to do in marble sculpture, but it had been done with, it's like the throwing discus statue. Oh, I wish I remember the name. But in my history of ancient art class, and the history of modern art, that was a very interesting subject to study, because there's some universal laws of art that come from experience. And the true masters of art know them and apply them and teach them. This is quite powerful. Quite powerful. And all activities and processes have to do with individuals. All activities and processes have to do with individuals. Yes, because our participation in them. Definitely. The doctor does not treat a man except accidentally. He treats Callias or Socrates or someone else described in this way, who is accidentally man. So if someone has grasped the principles of the subject without having any experience, and thus knows the universal without knowing the individuals contained in it, he'll often fail in his treatment. For it is the individual that has to be treated. That's unique. Okay, so when it comes to medicine, right? So he's trained in this sort of, because when it comes to nutrition, it comes to healing sick, it's all by the permission of Allah. But think about the way in which you have a person who has their own specific needs, but you try to analyze and access information laid down on the process and the methodology you go about of doing a certain surgery, a certain diet program to get the end result that you wanted that has been tested and tried. But you also have to examine what is going to be right for this individual. So that's very powerful. Quite interesting. Right? What do you think, fam? What do you think? Yeah, some points. We're getting into art.